Hey y'all, this is going to be the last lecture for period 6. This is on immigration, nativism, and racism. I'm also going to be going over cities, so you can have it for the test. So nativism is anti-immigrant feeling. And as immigration increases, what you'll see is that a lot of times you get an increase in anti-immigrant sentiment. Some of the fears are around the idea that they're going to take away jobs, and racial and ethnic prejudices. Although, right, most folks who come into the United States do assimilate. There's always an idea that, these folks are never going to assimilate into American society. Sometimes there is violence. Probably the most successful one we're going to go over as an idea of nativist sentiment is the Chinese Exclusion Act. So before the Civil War, and this is kind of backtracking a little bit, there was the Irish immigration in the 1830s. There was anti-Irish sentiment with the Know Nothing Party. There was a lot of backlash against parochial schools. We took away funding from parochial schools. There is universal white male suffrage, though, and this is going to be one of the key parts when we were in that Jacksonian time period, period 5, or the antebellum time period. And so as Irish are going to fight in the Civil War, they are going to be included into universal white male suffrage. They are going to become part of what is called the political machines, especially in New York City, but in cities all over the United States. So Thomas Nast, we took a look at, he is a Republican, and he has a lot of anti-Irish nativism. Part of it is also because these Irish folks are part of the democratic machines, and he is a Republican. Like I said before, this is both nativist against Irish, but also, I think, partially political. So anytime you have a political cartoon and you have a political enemy, you often exaggerate their features, you make them look ghoulish and mean. And that is one way that the point of view of the political cartoonist is that they are making fun of that person. So new immigrants are coming after the Civil War, primarily in the 1870s and 80s. So before, there was a lot of Irish, usually settled in rural areas, Ireland, Scandinavia, and they were Protestant. And now, after 1880, a lot of folks are coming from Southern Europe, like Italy, Eastern Europe, like Russia and Poland, and many of them are Catholic and Jewish. So not only are there going to be nativist sentiment, but there's also anti-Semitism and anti-Catholic sentiment that goes along with these. So immigration is increasing during this time. They're coming into the East Coast from Europe. Millions of immigrants are going to come in over 40 years. West Coast is going to be Angel Island near San Francisco. And so while the East Coast, less than 2% are denied entry, we are going to have the Chinese Exclusion Act on the West Coast in 1892. And then the South, we have people coming into El Paso from Mexico. And I think it's important to note that all of this is legal immigration. There was no such thing as illegal immigration because there was no restrictions on immigration until the Chinese Exclusion Act. So folks are coming into the cities during this time. The one part about what I want to go over is social Darwinism and natural selection. So, Darwin never said survival of the fittest. He said survival of the most adapted. So if we look at something like these mice, the white mice are no stronger than, it's not like these mice are stronger physically or smarter. They are just a different, shade, right? And so these folks are going to be more adapted to their environment, and that is why they are going to survive. So it is not survival of the fittest, strongest, smartest. It is just survival of the most adapted. Now, what people in the social Darwinists are going to do is they are going to take social Darwinism and apply them to a racist society. They're going to try to use Darwin to explain away or to kind of either justify or explain imperialism or genocide or Jim Crow. And so what they do is they take and kind of distort, Darwin's belief of natural selection and says survival of the fittest. and that it is intended, right? These are the biological evolution. So when we take a look, this easily and quickly becomes another kind of peg into scientific racism. You know, why is this guy, if we look out onto the world, why does this guy have the most wealth? Why is he the most quote unquote civilized? Well, it must be because everyone else is less fit. So we start to get these ideas of white supremacy are, you know, really enforced through social Darwinism, as an excuse, as a justification, also as a part of imperialism and racism and all of these other things. I think interestingly, though, at first, the Irish, right, are not considered white. There's a lot, I don't know if you can hear it, there's a chicken outside my door. Anyway, so the Irish were not considered white. The whitest of white, the best whites, were white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, right? And the Irish were kind of looked down upon. They were not considered white for a while. And we see a lot of these depictions in racial stereotypes. Again, racial stereotypes of black folks as well, you know, too. So you get this idea that there are four races of men. You know, Irish people become white. And why is this important? Because you have universal white male suffrage. And so why Irish people become white, who is not going to have, you know, access to the vote? Well, we're going to take out, even though there's the 14th Amendment with literacy test, and we're going to deny citizenship to Native Americans and to Asians, and we are going to exclude Asians. So essentially, we maintain these discriminatory practices, even though we have like the 14th Amendment after the Civil War. And so the impact of social Darwinism is you have to consider, like, well, why are these kids in the gutter? You know, why are they poor? Why are they playing in poop? Why is there a dead horse? Why do you have this happening when you have like Andrew Carnegie living it up with like billions of dollars? Andrew Carnegie actually said the drunker in the gutter is just where he ought to be. According to the fitness and tendency of things, nature has set upon him the process of decline and dissolution by which she removes things which have survived their usefulness. So why are these kids in the gutter? They suck, right? They are not as good. They are not as able. They're lazy. They are not fit. They are not doing what they should be doing to kind of raise themselves up out of the gutter. So Andrew Carnegie also, though, was not the worst of the worst. Because if you take social Darwinism far, what should you do to these kids? You should just, you know, let them die. That's it, right? Don't help them, let them die. Because if you help them survive and they are not fit, they are going to weaken society. Andrew Carnegie did have the gospel of wealth, though. And he says, well, we're not going to let them totally die, but we do not want to give them money because then they're just going to waste it. What we're going to do is we're going to build a library here and we're going to give them books. And once they have books, then they can learn how to like help themselves, and that is how we are going to help them. So instead of a stick to beat a dead horse, here's a book, and you can go and improve yourself and raise yourself out of the gutter. So Andrew Carnegie, through his Gospel of Wealth, he says it is rich people's duty to help out the poor, and they should do that by giving them the means to improve themselves. And that is his philosophy. And usually it was through libraries and these other ideas. So New York City is one of these places that is rising up during the Gilded Age. And the buildings that they are building to house all of these new immigrants are called tenements. So this would be a tenement right here, where they're stacked on top of each other and they are filled with immigrant families. So the problems with the cities is there's a real shortage of affordable housing. There are sanitation problems, which we saw on that other slide, right? Essentially, you would have, you know, all of these people living in these buildings in a tenement, right? And you would have, I don't know, 80 families in a tenement, and they are like pooping in the streets. You have, you know, horse poop in the streets. You have water running through. You have cholera, right? There is no sanitation. and it is really a problem. Disease is a problem, air pollution is a problem. And so at first, people, before the tenements, they were actually just living in these rundown shacks, and the tenements are actually a, improvement. So in these cities, you are going to have new immigrants. You're also going to have families from rural areas coming in search of work, some African Americans, and railroads are really what is connecting these cities. You can't have, you know, cities without a shipment of food, and Chicago and other cities like Atlanta are going to become major cities because of the railroads. So here are some more pictures of these tenements, right? You have no windows, so there's no kind of like ventilation, no natural light. Very, if you have a smoking thing here, like a wood stove, it is very, 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 very dark and dank and smelly. You notice all these kind of like clothes in here. In this backyard, you would have like maybe like one toilet. It is very dirty. So how are people going to run these cities? And I think this also goes back to this idea of old immigrants and new immigrants. So the Irish came in the 1830s, and they were the first to get here. And so they are kind of in these cities, and what they're going to do is create their political party around the Democrats. They're going to create what are called machines, Tammany Hall being one of them, where they organize essentially almost like a mafia, and they start to hand out jobs in order for people to vote for them. And they do give, services like the police and fire departments. If you look at the police and fire departments, especially in places like New York now, there's still a lot of Irish folks who work there because it goes way back. You're part of our, political machine. You get a job as a policeman. You could get kickbacks. You can, as a fire department at this point, you can also get kickbacks. Welfare, they'll hand out charity to the poor. They'll help people get registered to vote. They'll help people become citizens. And so as immigrants are coming in, the political machines are absorbing them into their political party. And so the boss is, almost like the mafia don. He's at the top of this, and he runs the wards, right? And so, on election day, you would have, the political machines have jobs. Throughout the year, you would have, if I want a job to work on any sort of project, construction, anything else, you would work for the machine in contracts. And then when it comes time to vote, you make sure you vote. And so on election day, you would have, your city boss, and then you would have your ward bosses, and then you would have your workers and captains. So if I was down here, right, what I would be doing is basically getting people to vote, right? I would drag them out, and then you would, get them into a, we'll take a look at that later. All right. But this is basically how it would go. And so it is, the boss employs his ward bosses who gives jobs, and this is how it works. This is how people would vote. This isn't often a symbol you would see in these Gilded Age cartoons. People would literally have a ballot, and then they would put it into the glass bowl, and you could see, right, how you voted. And actually, the city bosses would make their tickets, their ballots, certain colors. And so on election day, you would have a political, ward, like even police sometimes did this, would grab people, put, a ballot in their hand, watch them, put it into the glass bowl, drag them out, shave off their beard, give them another one, go back in, vote again. And often, because you would be dragging people into the polls, I might get a job as a police officer, I might get a job in construction. And this is this kind of idea of vote early and vote often in these political machines. We are going to have voting reforms later, but this is how it would be. Fake names multiple times, all of that. And graft is how people basically made money. You would charge taxpayers a lot for a project. So I'm going to charge 13 million for a project. It's really not going to cost that much. And you would then, basically skim off of the top. So in this house that Tweed would build, they would charge the city, I don't know, $10,000 for a toilet. It doesn't really cost that much, but all the rest of the money is going to go to their cronies, to their guys, to kickbacks, to payoffs. This is actually what's going to bring down Tweed, and he is going to be arrested on corruption. The person who is really following Tweed and exposing his corruption is Thomas Nast, and his kind of continual pursuit of getting Tweed, who is a Democrat, brings him down again. All right. So Nast tends to go after Republicans. This cartoon we kind of looked at before is going after the Irish, the Confederates, and some northern businessmen who are like oppressing black folks, right? In the early part of this, after the Civil War, he is, helping to support black rights. He is criticizing the Democratic Party because he sees the Democratic Party, this is their coalition during the time. So Chinese immigrants are coming into the West, and the reason why they're coming in is because of the railroad and jobs. And the United States actually tries to encourage them to come. And so there's the Burlingame Treaty that happens in 1868. And there's also, happening in China, like the Opium Wars and some other things that are kind of destabilizing China. And so at the time, it was actually cheaper and more cost effective, and it would take less time for people to come from China to the West Coast than it would from the East. And so the United States government, through treaties with China, actually encourages Chinese immigration. They welcome them in with the Burlingame Treaty, and Chinese immigrants are going to be working on railroads and mines. But almost as soon as they get started, white labor is going to fight against them. And I think another problem that they run into is their own is once the Transcontinental Railroad is completed, people can get to the West Coast very easily. And so there are more and more white people who want to have these jobs. And so they face a lot of violence. There are massacres. They cannot testify in court. They are not citizens. They cannot vote. People try to attack their culture by cutting off their pigtails in this pigtail ordinance if they were in jail. So almost immediately you have a lot of nativist, anti-Chinese sentiment in the West, and it is very successful because Chinese folks do not have a vote. They are not accepted into any specific political party. Some Republicans did, like you will see cartoons from Thomas Nast where he supports Chinese rights, but this is not actually accepted, and a lot of Republicans start to accept these anti-Chinese sentiment. And so as this migration continues, the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882 is going to be this like first step in having illegal immigration now. You could stay if you were here, but you could never go home and then come back. And the other thing is a lot of people who are in the United States are going to be men, because usually they would send home and then get their families later. And so you have a lot of men who are isolated in the United States with no families that are able to come over. So again, Nast supports the Chinese, but the Republicans in the end are not going to, and a lot of Republicans like Blaine are going to accept the Chinese Exclusion Act, which is what this one is. He's kind of criticizing David, or not, I don't think his name was David, Blaine, for kicking the Chinese off the voting rights. So, we start to have the beginning of immigration restriction. Between 1880 and 1920, more than 20 million immigrants arrive. The majority are from Southern and Eastern Europe, at least 4 million Italians and 2 million Jewish folks. You have Chinese Exclusion Act, which is our first immigration restriction in 1882. And then we start to get like Ellis Island. And when we get to World War I, we are going to, after World War I, we are going to start to have a quota system and literacy tests and other things that are going to start kind of our modern day idea of immigration restriction. So the last part I want to look at are cities. Immigrants are moving into the cities. Some African Americans are moving into cities. Where are the middle class white folks moving? Is they are moving to the suburbs. This is not the suburbs like the highway car suburbs. These are called streetcar suburbs. I think a perfect example are the Victorian houses as you take the streetcar, uptown. These really nice houses. These would be where the upper class are going. They're moving out of the city centers. I mean, to us, this is not the suburbs, but at the time, that would be considered the suburbs. And so you have the middle class moving to the outskirts of the downtown, whereas downtowns are becoming more filled with immigrants, busier, especially in New York City. Um, there are a lot of health issues in these cities we talked about before. There's only like one toilet. Um, and they do start to have some regulations from the cities. The first one in 1880 said that you had to have some toilets. I think it was like one for like every 80 people, and people were like, oh my God. But these are still really gross because they would get backed up. Someone was supposed to just like put a bucket of water down there and clean it out, but it never worked. They still don't have running water until, I don't know, 1903, 1920, I don't know. Jacob Riis is going to be one of the first photojournalists who are going to take the idea of exposing how the other half lives. And I think, whenever you're taking a look at images or at, political cartoons, you really have to look at the title because it'll give you a really good idea. So one question is usually like, who is the intended audience of how the other half lives when you take a look at these photos? So, if he's taking this photo, who is his intended audience of how the other half lives? Well, it is the people who are in the suburbs, the upper class, the people who have moved away from the city, the people who are like averting their gaze from what is happening in these downtown areas. And so when he takes a picture of, I think this one is called the Italian rag picker, what is he trying to do, right? Think about the framing. This guy is, setting up this huge camera. He has to set up lighting. This is before, you don't have a cell phone that you can just snap a picture. This is very posed. Why is he picking this particular pose? She is looking up. She has a baby. You have this thing here. This looks almost exactly like the iconic picture of the Virgin Mary. He's trying to create empathy, right? He's trying to challenge the idea of like social Darwinism that, she is just there because she deserves to be there because like whatever, she's trash, right? She picks up trash because she's trash. No, what he's saying is she is a mother, she's trying hard, she is working, she is resilient, right? He's trying to create empathy by posing her in such a way that you can see this. And so when he's saying how the other half lives, he's exposing these terrible conditions in the cities. We're going to get into the progressives later. He's one of the early progressives who wants to have change. And so this is a tenement, 5 cents a spot. You could see, how many people are living there. And these are people who are working 12 hours a day, making $1 a day, and then at night they are spending a nickel for a place to sleep, and this is where they are sleeping. I do like his pictures of kids because you could almost see how posed they are. You could see like, I don't know, every time I look at this, he used to pay these kids in cigarettes to pose, and you can almost see them almost smirking, like, this kid is smirking. He's like, okay, take the picture, dude, give me my cigarettes. He would pose like crimes and things like that. This is a growler gang. I don't know if I should go into this. How much time do I have anyway? I'll talk about growler gangs, and if you want to turn off this thing, you can. But the growler gangs, actually, women couldn't drink in bars. And so they would have parties where little kids would take a growler, which is like a mug of beer, and then they would go to the bar, they would get it filled up, and then they would go back to the party, and then they would they'd give them the beer, and they would get a tip, and then they'd go back to the bar. They're basically like bar runners. And like 8-year-old kids were growler gangs, because if one kid had a growler in his hand, other kids would beat him up, take his growler, get his money, and then like try to take over their route. So all throughout New York City, there were like 8-year-old growler gangs who would beat each other up, trying to have control over these beer running routes. Anyway, my kid can't even open the front door, and he's 8. Anyway, so you have how the other half lives. 12 adults sleeping in a room, exposing these tenement, which is these like buildings which people are living in downtown. And it led to a call for reform. And it pretty much works. In 1901, city officials are going to pass tenement house laws, which outlaws these new tenements on 25-foot lots. They try to improve the sanitary conditions, and they update existing structures. And the last kind of idea that also would be like kind of targeted by people like Jacob Riis and other folks is the social gospel. And this is just like, what would Jesus do? You know, Jane Addams is an example of someone who tried to improve the lives of people in the cities because she thought they needed moral improvement. So, someone needs a bath. Don't give them a book, give them a bath, right? If you need a food, don't give them a book, give them food, right? Give them a place to eat. A lot of people need daycare. They needed schools. They needed places to go. And so they're trying to nourish people into a more moral life. There is a lot of like Protestant effort to kind of not convert, but anyway. And that is basically that. All right, take care, and I'll talk to you later.